Have you ever wondered what would happen if a stranger walked into your church on a Sunday morning, not dressed in a suit, not carrying a Bible, but wearing torn slippers and a shirt that hadn't been washed in days? Would people notice? Would they move closer or slightly away? An American pastor once asked himself that question, but he didn't ask it from a stage. He asked it in silence, in prayer, and eventually in action. His name was Daniel Harper, 61 years old. I'm born and raised in Ohio. For over 3 decades, he had preached in well-organized churches across the United States. Clean pews, soft lighting, clear schedules, predictable generosity. He had also preached countless sermons about compassion, about humility, about how Jesus walked among the poor. And yet, something had been quietly bothering him. Attendance in his church had been stable, donations were strong, programs were efficient, but he felt a certain distance growing, something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't scandal, it was more subtle than that. Comfort. One evening, after finishing a sermon on sacrificial love, he went back to his office and sat alone. He asked himself a difficult question. If I walked into my own church looking like a beggar, would anyone sit beside me? The thought stayed with him longer than he expected. A few months later, Daniel traveled to the Philippines. He had been invited to speak at a leadership conference in Manila. It wasn't his first international trip, but it was his first time in Southeast Asia. He didn't know much about the country beyond what most Americans hear. Warm weather, strong faith, overseas workers, natural disasters. But what he heard from missionaries intrigued him. They described Filipino churches as vibrant, emotional, deeply rooted in community. And they spoke of congregations where even the poorest members brought something to share. Daniel listened carefully, and somewhere in his heart, an idea began forming. What if I tried it there? Not to embarrass anyone, not to create a viral moment, but to test something deeper. The Sunday before he was scheduled to preach at a well-known church in Quezon City, Daniel did something no one expected. He left his hotel early. He wore old clothes he had purchased from a street vendor. He rubbed dust into his sleeves. He left his watch behind. He removed the polished tone from his posture. Then he walked toward the church building, not through the main entrance, but slowly, uncertainly, like someone who did not know if he was welcome. Outside the gate, families were arriving. Children in neatly pressed shirts, grandmothers holding Bibles wrapped in cloth, young professionals greeting each other with warm smiles. Though some noticed him immediately, not loudly, not rudely, but you could see it. A few curious glances, a slight pause. He kept his head down. He sat near the back, on a wooden bench close to the wall. For a moment, nothing happened. The music started. Voices rose in worship. And Daniel, pretending to be someone invisible, waited. He wasn't prepared for what happened next. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was quiet. A teenage boy approached him first, said he didn't ask questions. He simply sat beside him. After a few minutes, the boy leaned over and whispered, "Are you alone, sir?" Daniel nodded. The boy smiled. "You can sit with my family if you want." It was simple. No performance, no cameras, just an invitation. A few rows ahead, an elderly woman turned around and noticed Daniel's worn appearance. During the offering, when baskets passed by, she hesitated, then gently placed a small folded bill into his hand instead. "For you," she whispered. He almost broke character right there. He had not even asked for help. He had not spoken a word. And yet help had found him. The service continued. The pastor preached about faith during hardship, about trusting God when resources are scarce. Daniel listened carefully. He observed how people responded. When prayer time came, something unexpected happened. A man in his 40s, dressed in a simple barong, walked toward Daniel. He knelt beside him. "Kuya, can we pray for you?" Daniel's throat tightened. He nodded again. The man didn't ask for a story. He didn't demand proof. He didn't measure worthiness. He simply prayed, not softly, not theatrically, but sincerely. "Lord, you see him. You know his needs. Remind him he is not alone." Those words pierced deeper than any sermon Daniel had preached in years, because for the first time in a long time, he felt what it was like to receive without status, to be seen without credentials, to be embraced without introduction. After the final song, several members approached him. Someone offered him food. Someone else asked if he had family. A young mother pressed a small paper bag into his hands. Inside were 2 pieces of bread and a banana. "We share what we have," Warshi said gently. Daniel could barely respond. He had expected kindness, but not this kind of dignity. No one treated him as a project. No one displayed superiority. They did not look at him with pity. They looked at him with concern and respect. And then something even more unexpected happened. The head pastor walked toward him. Daniel recognized him immediately, of course. They had exchanged emails. They were scheduled to share lunch later that day. But the pastor did not recognize Daniel. He extended his hand. "Brother, welcome. I don't think we've met." Daniel slowly lifted his eyes. And in that moment, he made a decision. He could end the experiment there. Reveal himself. Laugh about it. Turn it into a lesson. Instead, he asked a question. "If I told you I was not who you think I am, would you still treat me the same?" The pastor looked at him steadily. He didn't smile. He didn't look confused. He answered calmly. "We don't protect our reputation here. We protect people." Daniel swallowed. The pastor continued. "If you are a guest, you are welcome. If you are in need, we stand with you. If you are sent by God to test us, then we thank Him for the opportunity." There was no defensiveness, no suspicion, just steady conviction. Daniel slowly reached into his pocket and removed a small folded paper. It contained the printed invitation with his name. The pastor read it, looked back at him, and for a brief second, silence covered the space between them. Then something rare happened. The pastor did not laugh. He did not feel embarrassed. He placed his hand gently on Daniel's shoulder and said with certainty, "No, I'm protecting it, not the building, not the image, the spirit of the church." Daniel felt tears rise unexpectedly because he realized something powerful in that moment. In many places, churches protect their brand. But in this place, they protected their humanity. Later that afternoon, when Daniel finally stood at the pulpit in his clean clothes, the congregation listened carefully as he shared what he had done. There were gasps, a few quiet chuckles, but mostly stillness. He described the teenage boy, the elderly woman, the prayer whispered beside him. He paused longer than usual. Then he said something that stayed with everyone in the room. "In my country, we talk about outreach programs. Here, you live it." His voice was steady. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. He explained that faith is not measured by the size of buildings or the volume of music. It is measured by what happens when no one important is watching. When someone walks in unnoticed. When someone looks different. When someone has nothing to offer in return. That afternoon, Daniel sat quietly alone before returning to his hotel. He replayed every detail. The dust on his sleeves, or the folded bill in his palm. The words of the pastor. "No, I'm protecting it." He realized he had not come to the Philippines to test a church. He had come to confront something in himself. Somewhere along the way, comfort had dulled his sensitivity. Success had softened urgency. But that morning, in a simple wooden church in Quezon City, something had been restored. Not hype, not emotion, conviction. Weeks later, back in Ohio, Daniel made a quiet change in his own church. He removed reserved seating. He encouraged members to sit beside unfamiliar faces. He stopped using the word outreach as a program and started using it as a posture. And every time someone new walked in, he remembered the way he had felt sitting alone on that bench in Manila, uncertain, invisible, and then seen. He never publicly shamed his own congregation. He never compared cultures. He simply shared a story. And when someone once asked him privately why that experience affected him so deeply, he answered without hesitation. Because they didn't know who I was, and they loved me anyway. There is something powerful about that, something quietly strong. In a world that often values influence, position, and recognition. There are still places where character speaks louder, where faith is practiced before it is preached, where protection means guarding the heart of the community, not its appearance. Maybe that is why he cried that day, not because he was exposed, but because he was reminded. And perhaps the question is not what happened to him, but what would happen to us. If someone walked into our space tomorrow, unknown, unimpressive, unannounced, would we protect our comfort, or would we protect what truly matters? Sometimes, the strongest testimonies are not shouted. They are lived quietly, on wooden benches, in small acts, in churches far from headlines. And sometimes, it takes pretending to be invisible to finally see what is real.